The person forcing the situation is never the person controlling it. Watch any room carefully. The one speaking loudest, pressing hardest, demanding the outcome they want with the most visible energy, this person appears powerful. They feel powerful, but they are not controlling the situation. They are reacting to it, responding to conditions rather than creating them, applying force to a problem that force was never designed to solve. Control is quieter than force. It looks different. It does not announce itself. It does not press against the situation the way a fist presses against a wall. It shapes the situation the way water shapes stone, not through force, but through patience, through presence, through the continuous and almost invisible rearrangement of conditions until the outcome becomes inevitable. Sun Tzu understood this as the foundational principle of all genuine strategy. He did not admire the general who fought brilliantly. He admired the general who arranged conditions so thoroughly that fighting became unnecessary, who controlled the situation before the situation could force a confrontation. This is the most sophisticated form of control available, and it is available to anyone willing to understand how conditions actually work and how to shape them before the moment of crisis arrives. Let's begin with the core distinction, because it is the distinction everything else depends on. Forcing is the attempt to make a situation produce a specific outcome through the direct application of your will, your energy, your authority, or your pressure. It is effort aimed at the output. It says, "I want this result, and I will push until the situation delivers it." Shaping is something fundamentally different. It is the indirect arrangement of the conditions from which the desired outcome will naturally emerge. It is effort aimed at the input at the terrain, the timing, the alignment of forces. It says, if these conditions are present, the result will follow without requiring force. The difference is not a matter of style, it is a matter of mechanism. Forcing works against the natural direction of the situation. Shaping works with it. And working with the natural direction of a situation is always structurally more efficient than working against it. Sun Tzu described this as the principle of Shi, the strategic configuration of power. Not power applied in the moment, but power accumulated in advance, positioned correctly, allowed to flow naturally toward the outcome. The stone does not push the river, it positions itself where the current is already going. The person who has positioned correctly, who has shaped the conditions rather than forced the outcome, does not need to exert effort at the moment of the result. The result arrives as a consequence of the positioning. The effort has already been spent, invisibly, in the arrangement. Now, let's make this concrete, because abstract principles, however true, do not change behavior without translation into specific, recognizable situations. Consider a meeting where a decision needs to be made. The forcing approach enters the meeting and argues for the desired outcome. It makes the case, applies pressure, uses authority or persuasion to move the room toward the conclusion it wants. This approach sometimes works, but it has costs. It creates visible opposition. It consumes political capital. It leaves the people who were not persuaded feeling overridden rather than convinced. And the next meeting begins with the accumulated friction of this one. The shaping approach does something different, and it does it before the meeting. It speaks individually to the key participants. It understands their actual concerns, their actual priorities, their actual reservations. It adjusts the proposal to address those concerns where they are legitimate. It frames the outcome in terms that align with each person's genuine interests. By the time the meeting begins, the outcome has already been determined not by force, but by the invisible work of alignment done before a single formal argument was made. The meeting is not where the decision happens. The meeting is where the decision is announced. And the person who arranged the conditions before the meeting controls the meeting without forcing it. Sun Tzu would recognize this instantly. The battle was won before it was fought. There is a quality of attention that shaping requires, which forcing does not, and developing it is the first genuine practice this philosophy demands. Forcing requires knowing what you want, Shaping requires understanding what is actually happening. These are very different relationships to a situation, and they produce very different information. The forcing person enters a situation with their outcome already fixed. Everything they observe is filtered through the question, does this help me get what I want, or does it obstruct me? This filtering is efficient. It is also blinding. It systematically excludes the information that would reveal which approach would actually work, because that information is in the texture of the situation itself, not in the person's predetermined conclusion about where it should go. The shaping person enters a situation with genuine curiosity. They are reading the conditions, feeling for the natural direction of the energy in the room, identifying where the resistance lives and what it is actually made of, understanding which forces are already in motion and which direction they are naturally moving. This reading is not passive. It is the most active and demanding form of engagement available because it requires genuinely suspending your own agenda long enough to perceive what is actually there rather than what you need to be there. Sun Tzu wrote that the general who knows the terrain will find victory. Not the general who knows what they want, the general who knows the terrain. The terrain is the situation, and you cannot shape what you have not first genuinely understood. Let's examine the specific qualities of the situation that shaping attends to, because attention without direction is not strategy, it is observation. The first quality is momentum. Every situation has momentum, a direction it is already moving, shaped by the forces that preceded your arrival. The shaping person identifies this momentum before attempting any influence. Not because momentum cannot be redirected, but because redirecting it requires far less energy when you work with its existing arc rather than against it. A group that has been moving toward one conclusion for weeks cannot be stopped by a single meeting, but it can be nudged by the right question at the right moment, the reframing of a concern in terms that shift the direction slightly. Over time, the nudge accumulates. The outcome that arrives looks almost like the direction the group was always moving because it is slightly adjusted, which is exactly what the shaping person intended. The second quality is timing. Sun Tzu was explicit that the same force applied at different moments produces entirely different results. The right intervention at the wrong moment accomplishes nothing. The same intervention at the right moment, when the situation is genuinely in motion, when the decision point has naturally arrived, when the conditions are fully aligned, requires almost no effort. The shaping person waits for the right moment rather than forcing action before it arrives. This requires the patience we discussed in the previous video, the discipline to hold the intervention until the situation is genuinely ready to receive it. The river does not choose when to carve the canyon. It waits for the conditions that make carving inevitable. The third quality is resistance. Understanding where resistance lives, not to overcome it by force, but to work around it, to address its genuine source. To remove it through understanding rather than pressure is perhaps the most valuable skill the shaping approach develops. Most resistance is not obstruction for its own sake. It is the expression of an unmet concern, an unaddressed fear, an interest that has not been incorporated into the proposed outcome. Address the genuine source, and the resistance dissolves without requiring anyone to be defeated. Sun Tzu wrote about the concept of Wu Wei, the action that arises from non-action, the movement that seems to require no effort because it works entirely with the natural flow of conditions. This concept, borrowed from Taoist philosophy and applied to military strategy, is perhaps the most important and most misunderstood idea in the entire art of war. Wu Wei does not mean doing nothing. It means doing nothing that is against the natural direction of things. It means moving when movement is aligned with the situation's own momentum, speaking when the room is genuinely ready to hear, acting when the conditions have been arranged so completely that the action is almost unnecessary. The general who achieves Wu Wei is the general who has done enormous work, but has done it invisibly, in the arrangement of conditions before the decisive moment. At the decisive moment itself, they appear to do almost nothing. The outcome simply occurs. And the observers, watching the effortless resolution, conclude that this person is extraordinarily talented when what they are witnessing is extraordinarily prepared. This is the goal, not the appearance of effortlessness, the actual effortlessness that comes from having invested the effort where it genuinely belongs in the conditions, not the outcome. Let's talk about control in human relationships, because this is the domain where forcing is most damaging and shaping is most misunderstood. The forcing approach to relationships attempts to produce specific behaviors from other people through argument, through pressure, through the explicit or implicit communication that the other person's current behavior is unacceptable. It is direct, it is often honest, and it almost always produces the opposite of what it intends. People do not change because they have been pressured into changing. They change when the conditions of their interior life make change, the natural, self-generated direction of their own movement. Pressure from outside, however well-intentioned, activates resistance not because the person wants to be resistant, but because the psychological immune system treats external pressure as a threat to autonomy and responds accordingly. The shaping approach in relationships does not attempt to produce specific behaviors. It attends to conditions to what the other person actually needs, what they are actually afraid of, what genuine engagement would look like if it emerged from their own interior rather than from compliance with external demand. It asks questions rather than making demands. It removes obstacles rather than applying force. It creates the conditions in which the other person's own genuine movement can emerge, because genuine movement is the only movement that lasts. Sun Tzu would say, "Do not attack the city, change the conditions that make the city worth defending, and the gates open from the inside." Here is where the philosophy becomes most counterintuitive and most important. Control without forcing requires releasing the attachment to specific outcomes. This sounds like the opposite of control. It is actually its precondition. The person who is rigidly attached to a specific outcome cannot shape conditions effectively. Their attachment distorts their perception. They see what they need to be true rather than what is actually true. It clouds their timing. They move when their need is urgent rather than when the conditions are right. It limits their flexibility. They cannot adapt the desired outcome to the genuine shape of the situation because the desired outcome is too fixed to bend. The person who holds their desired outcome lightly, who knows what they are working toward, but remains genuinely open to the form it takes, the path it follows, the timing it requires, this person can respond to what the situation is actually providing. They can take the opening that appeared unexpectedly rather than the opening they were waiting for. They can accept the outcome that is 80% of what they wanted, arrived effortlessly, rather than 100% arrived through force. Schopenhauer would recognize this as the quieting of the will. Sun Tzu would recognize it as the principle of adaptability. Both are pointing at the same thing. The person who is not enslaved by their specific need for a specific outcome in a specific form at a specific moment is the person with the most genuine options available. And the most genuine options is the most genuine control. Let's look at this through a specific historical moment, one that illustrates the principle with a clarity that no abstract description can match. In 1813, Tsar Alexander I of Russia faced the question of whether to pursue Napoleon's retreating army across the borders of Russia into Europe. Napoleon had invaded with 600,000 soldiers. He was retreating with fewer than 100,000, decimated by the Russian winter and the scorched earth strategy that had denied his army the supplies it needed. The conventional military logic said, pursue, strike the weakened enemy, force the decisive conclusion, while the advantage is absolute. Alexander's advisors, including the cautious Kutuzov, understood something more sophisticated. The force was not necessary. The conditions had already determined the outcome. Napoleon's army was finished not by Russian arms primarily, but by Russian winter, Russian space, Russian patience. The pursuit would cost Russian lives to achieve what the conditions were already producing for free. The shaping had been done across months of strategic withdrawal, of refusing the decisive engagement that Napoleon required, of using terrain and time as weapons more powerful than any army. By the time the moment of apparent victory arrived, the victory had already occurred. The pursuit was force applied where force was unnecessary. Kutuzov understood Wu Wei. The situation had already been won. All that remained was to recognize it. Now let's translate this into the specific practices that make this philosophy livable rather than merely admirable. The first practice is the pre-engagement audit. Before any important situation, a conversation, a negotiation, a decision you need others to make, take the time to genuinely understand the conditions, not just your position, the actual terrain. Who are the key people? What do they actually care about? What are their genuine concerns? What is the natural momentum of the situation? Where is the resistance? And what is it actually made of? This audit feels slow. It feels like preparation when you want to act. But it is the investment that makes the action effortless, because the action that emerges from genuine understanding of conditions requires a fraction of the force that action from ignorance demands. The second practice is timing discipline. Identify the natural decision point of the situation and resist the impulse to force action before it arrives. Every situation has a moment when it is genuinely ready to move, when the conditions have aligned, when the people involved are genuinely receptive, when the intervention that seemed difficult a week ago now requires almost nothing. Wait for that moment, not passively continue shaping conditions in the interim, but hold the decisive action until the moment is genuinely right. Sun Tzu's general chooses the ground. The ground is not only space, it is also time. The third practice is the release of force as a default. When you feel the impulse to press, to argue, to insist, to apply more pressure because the current pressure is not working, treat that impulse as a signal, not a signal to press harder. A signal that you may be working against the natural direction of the situation. A signal to stop and ask, what is the situation actually ready for? And am I trying to force it somewhere it is not yet able to go? The deepest application of this principle is not situational. It is personal. The person who cannot control situations without forcing them is, almost always, a person who cannot stop forcing their own interior, who cannot allow their own thoughts to develop without immediately directing them, who cannot allow their own feelings to exist without immediately managing them, who cannot allow their own genuine direction to emerge without imposing the direction that anxiety has decided it should be. The same forcing that fails in external situations fails in the interior, and the same shaping that succeeds externally is what genuine psychological development looks like from the inside. Schopenhauer called it the quieting of the will. Nietzsche called it amor fati, the love of what is, including the parts that have not yet taken the form you were hoping for. Sun Tzu called it the principle of yielding to gain. All three are pointing at the same internal posture, the capacity to work with what is actually here rather than forcing it to be something else before it is ready. Develop this in your interior, and it will express itself naturally in every situation you enter. The composure that allows you to read conditions accurately. The patience that allows you to wait for the right moment. The flexibility that allows you to take the opening as it appears rather than the opening you planned for. These are not techniques. They are the natural expression of a person who has genuinely stopped forcing inside and out. Sun Tzu's supreme achievement was the description of victory that required no enemy to defeat. The situation itself arranged the outcome. The general simply needed to understand the situation well enough to position correctly and then to trust the positioning. That trust, the willingness to let the arranged conditions do their work without anxiously intervening before the work is done, is the final and most demanding element of the practice. It requires confidence in the preparation, confidence that the conditions you have shaped are genuinely aligned, confidence that the timing you are waiting for will arrive, confidence that the outcome you are working toward will emerge from the conditions rather than requiring you to force it across the finish line. That confidence is built the same way all genuine confidence is built, through experience. through the accumulated evidence of having shaped conditions correctly and seen them produce the outcome without requiring force. Through the memory of the meeting that resolved itself, the negotiation that reached its conclusion effortlessly, the relationship that moved in the right direction because the conditions were right rather than because pressure was applied. Each of these experiences deposits something in the interior that the next situation can draw on, the confidence that shaping works. That Wu Wei is real. That the situation controlled without forcing is the situation most completely controlled. So here is what you take from this. Before your next important situation, do not prepare what you will say. Prepare what you will understand. Read the terrain before you decide how to move. Find the momentum that is already present. Identify the resistance and its genuine source. Locate the timing that the situation itself is pointing toward. Then shape, not force. Adjust conditions quietly. Address concerns where they are genuine. Align the desired outcome with the genuine interests of the people involved. Position everything as carefully as you can before the decisive moment arrives. And then this is the hardest part. Trust the positioning. Let the conditions do their work. Do not reach for force because the outcome has not yet arrived. Do not press because the silence feels like nothing is happening. Everything is happening. In the invisible space of arranged conditions, the outcome is forming. Sun Tzu's greatest generals waited for what they had already made inevitable. They did not force what they had already arranged. You are arranging. Trust the arrangement. The situation will follow.